Before we begin tonight's story, if you're finding value in these accounts from the forgotten corners of America, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It helps more people find these stories. And I'm always curious where you're watching from, so drop your location in the comments. Now, let me tell you about the calls that changed everything I thought I knew about life, death, and the space between. I am Sion Bitsui, and I have been working as a paramedic for the Indian Health Service in the Navajo Nation for over 3 years. For 3 years, I have been driving an ambulance through some of America's most brutal and yet most beautiful landscapes. For 3 years, I have unfortunately witnessed people dying because help arrived too late, and sometimes I learn that death is much harder than we imagine. I need to tell you about the Navajo Nation before I tell you about the calls. Most people don't understand the scale. We're talking about 27,000 square miles, roughly the size of West Virginia, spanning parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. In 1996, when this story takes place, we had 12 ambulances to cover that entire area. 12. For a population of over 250,000 people. Do the math. On a good night, if you lived in one of the remote communities, help might arrive in 90 minutes. On a bad night, 3 hours or more. Sometimes we'd get the call, drive 2 hours into the backcountry, and find the patient had died an hour before we arrived. Sometimes they died in the ambulance on the 3-hour drive back to the hospital in Gallup or Flagstaff. I'd grown up in Chinle, in the heart of the nation, and I'd seen what delayed care meant. My younger brother Thomas had an asthma attack when I was 16. The ambulance took 45 minutes to arrive. He died 20 minutes into the drive to the hospital. I held his hand the whole time, watched him struggle for air, watched the paramedic do everything she could with the limited equipment we had. That's why I became a paramedic. That's why I came back after my training in Phoenix. Someone had to be there, even if there weren't enough of us, even if we couldn't save everyone. Someone had to try. It was October of 1996 when I took the call that started everything. I was working the night shift out of the Chinle station, partnered with Jimmy Benally, a Navajo medic who'd been doing this for 15 years. Jimmy had seen everything, or so he claimed. Heart attacks in Hogan's 50 miles from the nearest paved road, childbirths in pickup trucks on dirt tracks, accident victims trapped in vehicles at the bottom of ravines. You get used to it, he'd told me during my first week. You get used to the distances, the waiting, the ones you can't save. You have to, or it'll destroy you. I was still working on that part. That October night started normally enough. We'd had 2 calls in the first 4 hours of our shift. A diabetic emergency in many farms that we reached in time, and a possible stroke in Siley that turned out to be a bad migraine. Both patients transported safely to the Chinle Hospital. Both times we made it back to station before the next call came in. Around midnight, the radio crackled to life. Chinle Station, this is dispatch. We have a cardiac emergency, male, approximately 70 years old. Difficulty breathing, chest pain. Location is... There was a pause. Location is coming up as coordinates only, no street address. Caller reports patient is at a Hogan approximately 30 miles north of Chinle, accessed via BIA Road 12. Jimmy grabbed the microphone. Dispatch, this is Unit 3. Can you get a more specific location? BIA 12 runs for over 40 miles. Caller provided coordinates. Transmitting now. The fax machine in the corner wheezed to life, spitting out a piece of paper with GPS coordinates and a hand-drawn map. Jimmy picked it up and studied it, his brow furrowing. "Sion, look at this." I looked over his shoulder. The map showed BIA Road 12, then a turnoff onto what was marked as a seasonal access road. then several miles of unmarked track, then an X marking the location of the Hogan. "That's way out there," I said. "That's got to be a 2-hour drive, minimum. More like 2.5 in the dark." Jimmy checked his watch. "Cardiac emergency. If he's really having a heart attack, he'll be dead before we get there. We still have to try." "I know. I'm just being realistic." He grabbed the trauma bag and headed for the ambulance. "Let's move." We loaded up and hit the road, running lights and sirens through the empty streets of Chinle, then north on Route 191. The night was cold and clear, the kind of October night where you can see every star in the sky. Beautiful, if you weren't racing to save a dying man. We made good time on the paved road, but once we turned onto BIA 12, everything slowed down. The road was graded dirt, washboarded and rutted. I had to drop to 30 miles per hour to avoid destroying our suspension. Jimmy navigated using the GPS coordinates and a spotlight, looking for the turnoff to the seasonal access road. "There," he said, pointing to a gap in the sagebrush that could charitably be called a road. "That's it." I turned carefully, and we started the slow crawl toward the Hogan. The track was barely visible, 2 ruts in the dirt that wandered between rocks and gullies. Several times we had to stop and decide if the ambulance could make it through a particularly rough section. The isolation was total. No lights, no other vehicles, no signs of human habitation. Just red dirt, sagebrush, and endless sky. "You ever been out this way before?" I asked Jimmy. "No, and I've been doing this for 15 years. I thought I knew every Hogan, every family out here. This is new to me. Maybe they just moved here recently. Maybe." An hour and 45 minutes after leaving the station, our headlights caught a structure ahead. A traditional Hogan, 6-sided, made of logs and earth. Smoke was coming from the stovepipe chimney. A single pickup truck was parked nearby, an old Ford that looked like it was from the 70s. We grabbed our equipment and approached the Hogan. The door faced east, as tradition required. I knocked. "Ya Ati, this is IHS Emergency Services. We received a call about a medical emergency." No response. I knocked again, louder. The door opened slowly, and an elderly woman peered out. She looked at us with confusion, then something that might have been relief. "You came," she said in Navajo. "After all this time, you finally came." "Yes, ma'am, we're here to help. Where's the patient?" She gestured inside. "My husband. His chest hurts. He can't breathe." We entered the Hogan. It was dimly lit by a single kerosene lantern, traditionally furnished with sheepskins and woven rugs. And there, lying on a bed against the far wall, was an elderly man. Or what had been a man. I've seen death. I've seen bodies in various states of decomposition. But this was different. The man on the bed was mummified. His skin was leather, pulled tight over his bones. His eyes were sunken, his mouth open in a silent scream. He'd been dead for years, decades maybe. I stopped in my tracks. Jimmy saw it at the same moment and grabbed my arm. "Sion, we need to leave now." "But now." The old woman was still standing by the door, looking at us expectantly. "Can you help him, please?" I tried to keep my voice calm. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but your husband is deceased. He's been deceased for some time. We need to contact the authorities, get a medical examiner out here." "What do you mean, deceased?" "He was just talking to me. He called out that his chest hurt. That's why I called you." I looked at the body again. There was no doubt. This man had been dead for years. "Ma'am, when did your husband pass away?" "Pass away? He's not. He's right there. He needs help." Jimmy was already backing toward the door, pulling me with him. "We need to go. This is a Chindi situation. We shouldn't be here." Chindi. the Navajo belief in harmful spirits that linger after death. Traditional protocol was to abandon a hogan where someone had died, to avoid contamination from the dead person's spirit. "Wait," I said. "Something's not right here. The 911 call came in less than 2 hours ago. Someone called us. This man's been dead for years." Jimmy opened the door and practically shoved me outside. The old woman called after us, her voice plaintive. "Please, don't leave him. He needs help." We got to the ambulance and Jimmy started the engine before I'd even closed my door. "What the hell was that?" I asked. "I don't know, and I don't want to know. We're leaving." As we pulled away, I looked back at the hogan. The old woman was standing in the doorway watching us leave. And in the window next to her, I could swear I saw another face. Gaunt, skeletal, looking out at us with hollow eyes. The drive back was tense and silent. We radioed dispatch to report what we'd found, that we'd need the medical examiner and possibly the tribal police to investigate. Dispatch acknowledged, but there was something strange in the dispatcher's voice. "Unit 3, can you confirm your location? We're returning from the cardiac call about 30 miles north of Chinle on BIA 12. Unit 3, according to our GPS tracking, you never left the station." Jimmy and I looked at each other. "Say again, dispatch?" "Your vehicle GPS shows you've been stationary at Chinle Station for the past 2 hours and 17 minutes. You never moved." "That's impossible. We've been driving for almost 2 hours. Stand by, Unit 3. A different voice came on the radio. My supervisor, Sandra Yazzie. "Scion, Jimmy, this is Sandra. I need you to come straight back to the station. Don't stop anywhere. Don't take any more calls. Just come back." "What's going on?" "Just come back. We'll talk when you get here." We made it back to Chinle Station by 3:30 a.m. Sandra was waiting for us with 2 tribal police officers. She looked shaken. "Tell me exactly what happened," she said. We recounted the whole thing. The call, the drive, the hogan, the mummified man, the old woman who didn't seem to realize her husband was long dead. When we finished, Sandra pulled out a file folder and laid it on the table. "I pulled the 911 recording after you radioed in. I also pulled our records for any previous calls to those coordinates." She pressed play on a small tape recorder. We heard the 911 dispatcher's voice, then a man's voice. Elderly, speaking in accented English. "Please, I need help. My chest. I can't breathe. My chest hurts so bad. Please, send someone." "Sir, what's your location?" The man gave the coordinates, the same ones we'd been sent to. "Help is on the way, sir. Can you tell me your name?" John Nez. Please hurry. I don't want to die alone." The recording cut off. Sandra looked at us grimly. That recording was made tonight at 11:47 p.m. But here's the thing. We have 17 other recordings, all from the same location, all from the same man, all saying almost exactly the same thing. She pulled out a sheet showing dates. October 15th, 1996. October 15th, 1995. October 15th, 1994. She ran her finger down the list. Every October 15th, going back to 1974. We've been receiving the same call for 22 years. I felt cold. That's not possible. We've sent ambulances before. Usually they can't find the location. Sometimes they find the hogan, but nobody's there. But you're the first crew to actually find someone inside. "The mummified body," Jimmy said quietly. "That was John Nez." "I believe so. I pulled some old records." Sandra laid out another document. John Nez died October 15th, 1974, of a heart attack. His wife found him dead in their hogan. It took 3 days for anyone to reach them because of the remoteness of their location. When they finally arrived, John Nez had been dead for over 72 hours. "And his wife?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Mary Nez died in 1982. They buried her in the traditional way, and the Hogan was supposed to be abandoned after her death. But according to this, the 911 calls continued. 1983, 1984, 1985. Every October 15th. I thought about the old woman who'd answered the door, who'd asked us to help her husband. Mary Nez had been dead for 14 years. "So what did we see tonight?" Jimmy asked. "Ghosts? Spirits? A recording somehow playing out in physical space?" "I don't know," Sandra said. "But I know this. We've been receiving emergency calls from dead people for over 20 years, and tonight was the first time anyone actually made contact." One of the tribal police officers, a young man named Thomas Begay, spoke up. "There are stories. Elders talk about places where time doesn't work right, where the past and present get tangled up, especially around places of death and trauma. Maybe that Hogan is one of those places." "Great," Jimmy muttered. "Haunted Hogans, that's just what we need." Sandra closed the folder. "For now, we're logging this as an abandoned residence with human remains found. The medical examiner will go out there tomorrow in daylight with a full team. If the body is still there, they'll process it properly." "And if it's not," I asked, "then we have a bigger problem than I thought." They sent us home for the rest of the shift. I drove back to my apartment in Chinle, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the old woman's face, the way she'd looked at us with such hope when we arrived, the way she'd called after us as we left. And I kept thinking about that face in the window. John Nez, dead for 22 years, still calling out for help that would always arrive too late. The next evening, I came in for my shift and found Sandra waiting for me again. "The medical examiner went out there this morning," she said. "And? They couldn't find it, the Hogan. There's nothing at those coordinates, just empty land. They searched a 2-mile radius, no structure, no foundation, no evidence anyone ever lived there. But we saw it. We were inside it." "I know, I believe you, but it's not there now." She handed me another piece of paper. "This came in an hour ago, another 911 call." I looked at the date and time, October 16th, 1996. The location coordinates were different this time, but still remote, still far north of Chinle. "Different caller?" I asked. "Different voice, yes, but listen to this." She played the recording. A woman's voice, elderly, speaking in Navajo. "Please help, my daughter. She's bleeding. The baby is coming wrong. Please send someone." The dispatcher asked for details, got the coordinates, promised help was coming. Then there was a pause, and the woman said something else very quietly in Navajo. "It's been so long. I've been calling for so long. Please, this time, let someone come in time." Sandra stopped the recording and looked at me. "Sion, I need you to make a decision. Do you want to respond to these calls? Because I have a feeling this isn't the last one. I have a feeling we're going to keep getting them. Calls from the dead. Calls from people who died waiting for help that came too late. Or didn't come at all." I thought about Thomas, my little brother, dying in an ambulance because we lived too far from the hospital. I thought about all the people across the Navajo Nation who died the same way, waiting, hoping, slowly realizing help wouldn't arrive in time. And I thought about what it would mean to be trapped in that moment forever, making the same call, waiting for the same help, dying the same death over and over. "I'll respond," I said. "Someone has to." Sandra nodded slowly. "I thought you'd say that. Jimmy doesn't want to. I don't blame him. But I've assigned you a new partner. David Chi. He's experienced, he's calm, and he's seen some strange things in his time. When's the next call? We don't know. Could be tonight, could be next week. But when it comes, you'll be the primary response. I started my shift that night with David, a quiet man in his 40s who'd been a paramedic for 20 years. As we did our equipment check, he said, "Sandra told me about last night, about what you saw. You believe it? I've lived on the Nation my whole life. I've seen things that don't make sense. Places where the radio stops working for no reason. Roads that lead to places that shouldn't exist. So, yeah, I believe it. Good, because I don't want to do this with a partner who thinks I'm crazy. You're not crazy. You're just seeing what's always been there, but most people don't notice." The call came at 2:17 a.m. Unit 3, we have a difficult childbirth, female in her 20s, heavy bleeding. Location is 43 miles northeast of Chinle, accessed via Route 64, then unmarked roads. Transmitting coordinates now. David and I looked at each other. "This is it," I said. "This is it." We loaded the ambulance and headed into the night, into the vast darkness of the Navajo Nation, toward another impossible call from another ghost caught in the moment of death. And as we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that once I answered enough of these calls, I'd eventually answer one that would trap me too. That I'd become just another voice calling out from the darkness, waiting for help that would always come too late. But until then, someone had to try. Someone had to answer the calls that came from the spaces between life and death, from the moments frozen in time, from the people who died alone and afraid, even if it meant eventually joining them. The road stretched out before us, disappearing into darkness, and somewhere out there in a place that might or might not exist, someone was dying. Someone was calling, and I was going to answer. The drive to the second impossible call took us deep into territory I'd never covered before. David navigated while I drove, following GPS coordinates that led us farther and farther from anything resembling civilization. Route 64 gave way to a BIA maintenance road, which gave way to something that was barely a road at all. According to these coordinates, David said, studying the printout, "We're looking for a location about 8 miles past the last marked turnoff, in an area that's mostly designated as open range." Open range meaning what? No houses? No structures at all, according to the maps, just grazing land. But someone had called 911 from there. A woman, bleeding, in labor, her baby coming wrong. The desperation in her voice had been real, even if the call itself made no sense. We'd been driving for 90 minutes when our GPS signal cut out. "Lost satellite," David said, tapping the screen. "We're on our own now. Do you remember the general direction? Northeast. Keep following this track and we should hit it eventually." The track was getting worse, forcing me to slow to a crawl to avoid high-centering the ambulance on rocks. The headlights swept across endless sagebrush and the occasional juniper tree. No lights, no signs of habitation, nothing. Then, suddenly, there it was. A Hogan appeared in our headlights, sitting alone in the middle of nowhere. But something was wrong with it. Even from a distance, I could see the door wasn't in the right place. It faced west instead of east, violating one of the fundamental rules of Hogan construction. "David, look at that door." "I see it. That's not right." We pulled up, and I grabbed the medical bag and the trauma kit. As we approached, I noticed other things that were wrong. The logs of the Hogan were rotted, the roof sagging. The structure should have collapsed years ago. And there was a smell. Not death, exactly, but something stale and wrong. I knocked on the western-facing door. "IHS Emergency Services. We're here to help." The door swung open on its own. No one was there. David and I exchanged glances. He reached for his radio, but when he keyed the mic, all we got was static. "No signal," he said. Of course not. I pushed the door wider and stepped inside, David right behind me. The interior was dimly lit by candles, dozens of them, arranged in patterns that looked ceremonial but were nothing I recognized from traditional Navajo practices. In the center of the room, on a bed of blankets, lay a young woman. She was maybe 25, heavily pregnant, and there was blood. So much blood. "Ma'am?" I knelt beside her, checking for a pulse. She had one, thready and weak. Her skin was cold to the touch. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened. They were wide with fear and pain. "Help me," she whispered. "The baby. Something's wrong with the baby." "We're going to help you. I'm Cyan. I'm a paramedic. This is David. We're going to take care of you." I started my assessment while David set up the medical equipment. Blood pressure dangerously low. Pulse rapid and weak. She was going into shock from blood loss. "David, start an IV. 2 large bore. We need to get fluids running now." "On it." "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Annie. Annie Todachine." "Annie, when did your labor start?" "This morning. But something went wrong. The baby won't come and I keep bleeding. I've been calling for help but nobody came. Nobody came until now." "We're here now. We're going to get you to the hospital." But even as I said it, I was looking at the blood loss and knowing we might not make it in time. The nearest hospital was Chinle, over 2 hours away on good roads, and we'd just spent 90 minutes navigating terrible tracks to get here. I did a quick check and my stomach dropped. Placental abruption, severe. The baby was in distress, and Annie was hemorrhaging. This was a critical emergency even in a fully equipped hospital. Out here, with limited supplies and hours from definitive care, our options were terrifyingly limited. "David, we need to move her now. This can't wait." We got Annie onto the gurney and started toward the door. That's when I noticed something that made me stop cold. On the wall, carved into the wood, were dates. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, scratched into the logs in no particular order. 1968, 1973, 1981, 1995, and more recent, 1996. Today's date. "David, look at this." He saw the dates and his face went pale. "Cyan, we need to leave right now." We got Annie into the ambulance and I jumped in back with her while David took the wheel. He started the engine and we began the long drive back to civilization. Annie was fading. I pushed fluids, gave oxygen, did everything I could to stabilize her, but she was slipping away. And the baby's heart rate was dropping. "Annie, stay with me. We're almost there." "I'm so tired," she whispered. "I've been waiting so long for someone to come." "We're here now. Just hold on." I tried to hold on. But the baby, I couldn't save the baby. Her eyes closed. "Annie, Annie, stay with me." Her pulse was gone. I started compressions, called to David to go faster, but I knew it was too late. Annie. Todachine died in the back of my ambulance, her baby with her while we were still 40 minutes from the nearest paved road. I kept working. Compressions, rescue breaths, everything in my training. But she was gone. Finally, David pulled over. Cyan, stop. She's gone." I slumped back against the wall of the ambulance, my hands covered in Annie's blood. I couldn't save her. We got there and I couldn't save her. There was nothing you could do. That kind of hemorrhage out here, nobody could have saved her. We sat there for a long moment, the ambulance idling in the darkness. Then David said something that made my blood run cold. "Cyan, look at the equipment." I looked. The IV bag was full. The packaging from the medical supplies was pristine, still sealed. But I used these. I started the IV. I gave her oxygen. Look at your hands. I looked. They were clean. No blood. But I'd been covered in blood. I'd felt it, warm and sticky, as I tried to save Annie's life. David opened the back door and shined his flashlight on the gurney. It was empty. Clean. No blood, no evidence anyone had ever been there. "Where is she?" I demanded. "Where's the body?" "I don't think there ever was one. Not tonight. That's impossible. I touched her. I checked her pulse. She was real." David climbed into the back with me and pulled out his phone. He'd been recording our response time as protocol required. "Look at this," he said, showing me the screen. According to his phone, we'd left Chinley Station at 2:17 a.m. The current time was 2:34 a.m. 17 minutes. We'd been gone for 17 minutes. That's not possible. We drove for 90 minutes to get there. We spent at least 20 minutes with Annie. We've been driving back for 40 minutes. According to every clock we have, we've been gone 17 minutes. He started the ambulance and we headed back toward the Hogan, both of us needing to see it again, to confirm what we'd experienced. But when we reached the coordinates where it should have been, there was nothing. Just empty land, sagebrush, and darkness. "It was here," I said. "The Hogan was right here." "I know. So where did it go?" David was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I think the question isn't where it went. I think it's when." We returned to the station in a daze. Sandra was waiting again, and this time she didn't look surprised. "Same thing?" she asked. "Same thing," David confirmed. "Patient dead, location disappeared, time doesn't match." Sandra pulled out another file. This one was thicker than the first. Annie Todachin died October 16, 1968, from complications during childbirth. Placental abruption. She was found in her Hogan 3 days after she died, along with her unborn child. The Hogan was in an extremely remote location, and by the time anyone realized she was in trouble and got help out there, it was too late. 1968, I said. That was one of the dates on the wall. We've been receiving calls from that location every year since 1968. Always the same date, October 16th. Always the same caller. Sometimes crews find the Hogan, sometimes they don't. But everyone who's found it and gone inside reports the same thing. A young woman in labor, hemorrhaging, too far gone to save. "So we're responding to her death," I said. "Over and over. We're living through her last moments, watching her die, unable to change it. It appears that way. Why? What's the point? Why make us go through this?" David answered before Sandra could. "Because she waited for help that never came. She died alone, in pain, calling out for someone to save her. And now that moment is caught in a loop, playing out forever." Sandra nodded. "The tribal elders I've spoken to say that places of traumatic death can leave impressions, especially when someone died waiting, hoping, calling out. Their need is so strong it tears a hole in time, and the moment repeats. So every year, on October 16th, Annie Todachin dies again, and we get to watch. Unless we can figure out how to break the loop." I thought about what Annie had said in the ambulance. "I've been waiting so long." Not, "I've been in labor so long." Waiting. "She's aware," I said. "On some level, Annie knows she's stuck. She knows she's been calling for help for 28 years. "That's a long time to spend dying," David said quietly. Over the next 2 weeks, we responded to 4 more impossible calls. Each one followed the same pattern. Remote location, patient in critical condition, death before we could reach definitive care, time distortion, location disappearing afterward. a man with a gunshot wound who'd been dead since 1979, an elderly woman with a stroke, dead since 1983, a teenage boy who'd overdosed, dead since 1991, a child who'd drowned, dead since 1994. Every one of them had died waiting for help that came too late or didn't come at all. Every one of them was trapped in that moment, dying over and over, year after year. And every time, David and I showed up and watched them die, unable to change anything. It was destroying me. I'd become a paramedic to save people, and instead I was bearing witness to deaths I couldn't prevent, trapped in loops I couldn't break. After the fourth call, I went to Sandra and told her I couldn't do it anymore. "I understand," she said. "This is beyond what anyone should have to handle. How do we stop it? How do we break these loops? I don't know. The elders say the only way to release a trapped spirit is to acknowledge their death, to perform the proper ceremonies to help them let go. Can we do that? We can try. But Sion, you need to understand something. These calls are happening because of a real problem. Because our ambulance system is so underfunded and understaffed that people really do die waiting for help. Annie Totachin in 1968, John Nez in 1974, all the others. They died because help couldn't get there in time. And people are still dying for the same reason today. Yes, the ghost calls are symptoms of a larger problem, and until we fix that problem, I don't think the calls are going to stop. That night, as I tried to sleep, I kept seeing their faces. Annie, John, all the others. Trapped in their worst moments, dying forever, calling out for help that would never arrive in time. And I realized something terrible. If I died on the job, if I died responding to a call in some remote location, would I become one of them? Would I spend eternity trapped in that moment, calling out, waiting for help that would always come too late? The thought terrified me, but it also clarified something. I couldn't stop answering the calls, because even if I couldn't save the ghosts, I could save the living. I could make sure that fewer people died alone and afraid in the darkness. The next call came a week later. Different location, different patient. But when David and I arrived at the coordinates, we found something new. The Hogan was different, newer, and there were two locations overlapping, like a double exposure photograph. One Hogan from the past, one from the present, existing simultaneously in the same space. "Do you see that?" I asked David. "I see it." We approached carefully. Through one doorway, I could see a historical scene, an elderly man dying of a heart attack in 1974. Through the other doorway, I could see a modern scene, someone alive, current, real. "There's someone in there who needs help," I said. "Someone who's alive right now." "But which door do we go through?" I made a choice. I went through the modern door. Inside, I found a young man, maybe 19, unconscious, needle still in his arm. Overdose, recent, possibly reversible. "David, I need Narcan, now!" We worked fast. Narcan administered, airway secured, vitals monitored. The young man gasped and his eyes opened. Hey, you're okay, we've got you. You're going to be okay." He looked at me with confused, frightened eyes. "Where am I?" "You're safe. We're taking you to the hospital." As we loaded him into the ambulance, I looked back at the Hogan. The double exposure was gone. It was just a modern structure now, solid and singular. And I understood. The ghost calls were showing us where help was needed. The loops were markers, warnings, breadcrumbs leading us to people who were dying right now in the same places, in the same ways, for the same reasons. If we paid attention to the ghosts, we could save the living. "David," I said, as we drove toward the hospital with a patient who would survive. I think I understand now. I think I know what we're supposed to do. What? Listen to the dead. Follow their calls, because they're showing us where the living need help. The young man in the back of the ambulance was breathing steadily, the Narcan working its magic. He would make it. Because we'd learned from the ghost calls where to look, where people were dying, where the system was failing. The ghosts weren't just trapped. They were guiding us. And maybe, if we saved enough of the living, we could release the dead. I didn't know if it would work, but I was going to try, because someone had to answer the calls, all of them, living and dead. Until the day came when no one died alone in the darkness anymore. Her name was Annie Goldtooth, and she called 911 7 nights in a row, each time with a different emergency, each time from the same location, and each time I arrived to find her dead. The pattern started on September 19th, 1996. I was working another overnight shift and the call came in at 11:34 p.m. Female, 48 years old, reporting difficulty breathing and chest tightness, possible cardiac event or allergic reaction. The voice on the 911 recording was clear, coherent, frightened, but controlled. "My name is Annie Goldtooth. I'm having trouble breathing. My chest feels tight. Please send someone." The address she gave was specific, detailed. A trailer home about 18 miles south of Chinle, near the Siley Creek area. The phone number came back as active, currently in service. Not disconnected like the others. Thomas and I responded, hope rising in my chest that maybe, finally, this would be a normal call. Someone we could actually save. We found the trailer exactly where she'd said it would be. Lights on inside, a truck parked outside. Recent tire tracks in the dirt. All signs of active habitation. I knocked on the door. "IHS ambulance. We're here for Annie Goldtooth." No response. I tried the door, unlocked. We went inside. The trailer was neat, clean, lived in. Dishes in the sink, clothes folded on a chair, a television playing quietly in the corner. And in the bedroom, lying on the bed, was Annie Goldtooth. She'd been dead for hours. Not days or years like the others. Hours. Her body was still warm. The medical alert bracelet on her wrist indicated severe allergies to bee stings. On her neck, I found the puncture marks, 2 of them. And on the nightstand, a dead bee. She'd been stung, had an anaphylactic reaction, called 911, and died before help could arrive. The timeline fit. Call at 11:34 p.m., our arrival at 1:47 a.m. 2 hours and 13 minutes. For someone in anaphylactic shock, that was an eternity. I checked the nightstand drawer, looking for an EpiPen, some sign she'd tried to treat herself. Nothing. Just a phone, a glass of water, and a note. The note was in her handwriting, dated that day. "If I die before the ambulance gets here, tell them I tried to wait. Tell them I tried to hold on. Tell them it's not their fault it takes so long." I sat on the edge of her bed and cried. Not professional, not protocol, but I couldn't help it. This woman had known she was dying, and had spent her last moments worried about making us feel better about not reaching her in time. We called it in, documented the death, waited for the police to arrive. Standard procedure for an unattended death. But the note kept running through my mind. Tell them it's not their fault it takes so long. Except it was our fault. It was the system's fault. The underfunding, the vast distances, the impossible coverage area. Annie Goldtooth had died because the system failed her, just like it had failed Harold Zoe and Robert Benally and all the others. The next night, at 11:34 p.m. exactly, Annie Goldtooth called 911 again. "My name is Annie Goldtooth. I think I'm having a stroke. My left side is numb and I can't speak clearly. Please send help." I was in the ambulance when Irene radioed with the call. My whole body went cold. "Dispatch, can you confirm that name? Annie Goldtooth?" "Affirmative. Same address as last night." "Irene, we responded to that call last night. The patient was deceased on arrival." Silence, then. "I know, Sion, but she's calling again, and the 911 system shows it as a new call, current timestamp, active line." Thomas and I looked at each other. We both knew what this meant. Annie had joined the others, trapped in her moment of death, calling for help that would come too late, over and over. We responded anyway. This time, when we arrived at the trailer, Annie was on the floor near the kitchen. She'd had a stroke, had fallen trying to reach the phone, and had died there. The medical examiner would later determine she'd been dead for about 2 hours. We'd been exactly 2 hours and 8 minutes from her location when she made the call. The pattern continued. Night 3, she called with severe bleeding from a fall. Night 4, diabetic emergency. Night 5, heart attack. Night 6, seizure. Night 7, overdose. Each night at 11:34 p.m. exactly. Each night, a different medical emergency. Each night, we arrived to find her dead, having survived just long enough to make the call, but not long enough to wait for our arrival. It was Thomas who figured out what was happening. "She's dying in a loop," he said on the 7th night as we drove toward her trailer for the 7th time. "But it's not just one death. It's 7 different deaths, 7 different timelines, all collapsed into the same location. She died 7 different ways, and somehow we're responding to all of them. That's impossible. So were the disconnected phone lines. So were the phantom Hogans. This whole thing is impossible, Xian, but it's happening." When we arrived on night 7, I was prepared for another variation. But this time was different. This time, Annie was sitting in her truck in the driveway, engine running, looking at us. Not dead, not dying, just sitting there. I approached slowly. "Mrs. Goldtooth?" She rolled down the window. She looked exactly like she had in the trailer, but different, more solid, more present. "You came," she said. "All 7 nights. You came every time. You called. We had to respond. The others didn't, the years before you. They stopped coming after the 2nd or 3rd call. They thought it was a hoax, or they got scared, or they just gave up." She looked at me with the eyes that had seen too much. "But you came. Every night. Why?" "Because it's my job. Because you needed help." "I was already dead, Sion. I've been dead every night for 7 nights. Different ways, different timelines, all real, all happening at once. You couldn't save me. So why keep coming?" "Because someone had to witness it. Someone had to acknowledge that you died afraid and alone, calling for help. Someone had to see." Annie nodded slowly. "My grandmother told me stories about people like you. Witnesses, people who see the spaces between life and death. She said the dead need witnesses to move on, to be released from their loops. Is that what you need, to be released?" I thought so, but now I'm not sure. She looked past me, toward Thomas waiting by the ambulance. "You're going to join us eventually. You know that, right? If you keep answering these calls, keep witnessing these deaths, you'll become part of the pattern, part of the loop. Someone called and warned me about a week ago. They said it was me from the future. It was. You're already part of this, Sion. The moment you answered Harold Tso's call, you became entangled with the temporal wounds, with the places where trauma breaks through time." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. How do I stop it? You don't, that's the point. Once you become a witness, you can't unwitness. You carry it with you until it becomes part of you, and then you become part of it. She paused. But you can choose. You can stop answering, stop responding, let someone else take over. And if I do that, then they become the witness instead. They get trapped instead. The pattern continues, just with a different person in your role. She looked directly at me. Or you can keep going, keep answering, keep witnessing. And when you die, probably alone in an ambulance somewhere on these endless roads, you'll join us. You'll make your own calls from your own death loop. And some future paramedic will answer them. That's not a choice. That's a trap. Yes, but it's a trap someone has to step into, because if no one witnesses, if no one acknowledges these deaths, they just keep happening. The loops keep expanding. More people get trapped. Eventually, the whole nation becomes a temporal wound. Everyone stuck in their moment of greatest trauma. I looked back at Thomas. He couldn't hear this conversation. Couldn't see Annie sitting in the truck. To him, the vehicle was empty. What happens to you now? I asked. I get released. You witnessed all 7 deaths. You acknowledged all 7 versions of my last moments. That's enough. I can move on now. She smiled sadly. Thank you for coming. All 7 nights. Thank you for seeing me. She faded then. Not like she'd died, but like she'd been lifted out of time entirely. The truck was empty. Thomas jogged over. Did you see something? Yeah, I saw her. She's free now. Good. He looked relieved. Then we can stop coming here. This call is done. But I knew it wasn't done. Because that night, back at the station, Irene handed me a printout of the 911 calls from the past week. 7 calls from Annie Goldtooth, all documented, all time-stamped. And at the bottom of the page, a new call. From my address. From my phone number. The caller had identified herself as Sion Bitsui, paramedic, reporting a vehicle accident on Highway 191. Time of call, 3 years in the future. Date, September 19th, 1999. I was going to die in 3 years, in a vehicle accident, alone, and I was already calling for help. The loop was closing around me. Thomas saw the printout in my hands. Sion, what is it? I couldn't tell him. Couldn't explain that I'd just seen my own death reported in a 911 call from my future self. Couldn't explain that in 3 years I'd become one of them, one of the callers, one of the trapped. Nothing, I lied, just reviewing the logs. But it wasn't nothing, it was everything. It was the confirmation that Annie had been right. I was already part of the pattern, already entangled in the temporal wounds, and there was no way out except one. I could stop answering, stop responding, quit the IHS ambulance service and let someone else take my place. Let them become the witness instead. But I knew I wouldn't. Couldn't, because someone had to do this work. Someone had to answer the calls from the dead, witness their suffering, release them from their loops, even if it meant becoming one of them in the end. I folded the printout and put it in my pocket. 3 years. That's how long I had left. I was going to make them count. The pager went off. Another call. Another impossible voice from another impossible time, calling for help that would arrive too late. I picked up my gear and headed for the ambulance. The dead were waiting. They were always waiting. And soon I'd be waiting with them. September 19th, 1999. The date circled on my calendar for 3 years. The date I would die. I woke up that morning at 5:47 a.m., exactly 2 hours before my first shift was scheduled to begin. The sun hadn't risen yet, and my small apartment in Chinle was dark and quiet. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the things I should probably do on my last day alive. Call my mother, tell her I loved her. Maybe try to explain what I'd been doing for the past 4 years, why I'd become obsessed with answering impossible calls from impossible people. She'd never understood, thought I was working too hard, seeing too much death, losing touch with reality. She wasn't wrong. Call my sister in Phoenix, apologize for missing her wedding last year because I'd been responding to a call from a woman who died in 1983. Tell her the nieces and nephews she'd sent pictures of were beautiful, even though I'd barely looked at them. I'd been too consumed with the work, with the witnessing, with the pattern that had wrapped itself around my life like a vice. I should have done a lot of things, but instead I got up, made coffee, and started reviewing the logs from the past 3 years. 1,247 calls. That's how many impossible calls I'd answered since Harold Sow in 1996. 1,247 people who'd died waiting for help that came too late or never came at all. 1,247 temporal wounds I'd witnessed, acknowledged, helped to close. And soon I'd be number 1,248. I spent those 3 years preparing, not to prevent my death, I knew I couldn't, but to understand it. To make peace with becoming one of the voices calling out from the temporal wounds, waiting for help that would arrive too late. I kept answering the calls, hundreds of them over those 3 years, each one leading to someone who'd died waiting for an IHS ambulance, each one trapped in their moment of greatest fear and pain, each one needing a witness to acknowledge their suffering and release them from the loop. The calls became more intense as September 19th approached, as if the temporal fabric was thinning, allowing more voices to break through. In the final month alone, I responded to 73 impossible calls. Different decades, different locations, different causes of death, but all sharing the same terrible commonality. People who'd died alone, calling for help, waiting. Some of the other paramedics started calling me the ghost whisperer behind my back. Some thought I was having a breakdown. A few requested not to be partnered with me, afraid that whatever haunted me might transfer to them. The administration called me in for psychiatric evaluation twice. I passed both times, barely, by learning to talk about the calls in clinical terms, avoiding words like temporal wounds and death loops. But I knew what I was experiencing was real. The recordings existed. The 911 logs showed the calls. The phone numbers that had been disconnected for decades still rang through to dispatch. The coordinates that led to empty deserts still showed structures and photographs that no one could see with the naked eye. I wasn't crazy. I was witnessing something most people couldn't perceive. The places where trauma had torn holes in time itself. Thomas stayed my partner for 2 more years before he transferred to the Shiprock district in early 1998. Not because he didn't believe what we'd experienced. He'd seen too much to deny it, but because he couldn't handle it anymore. The weight of witnessing so much death, so much suffering, so much systemic failure that created these temporal wounds. On his last shift with me, we were driving back from a call, a real one, a living patient we'd actually managed to save, when he finally said what had been on his mind for months. "I can't do this anymore, Sion. I know someone has to answer these calls. I know someone has to witness, but it can't be me." His hands were tight on the steering wheel, knuckles white. "I have a family, kids, a wife who's already worried I'm going to die on one of these back roads. I can't become like them, like you're going to become." I didn't hold it against him. This was never meant to be a shared burden. The pattern had chosen me, not him. He was just collateral damage, someone who'd been too close when I became entangled with the temporal wounds. I understand, I said, and I did. Take care of yourself, Thomas. Take care of your family, that's what matters. What about you? Don't you want to take care of yourself? You know what's coming. September 19th, 1999. You've known for 3 years. Why not quit? Why not leave the nation? Go somewhere else. Break the pattern. I'd thought about it. Of course I had. But I'd also learned enough about the temporal wounds to know that running wouldn't help. The pattern wasn't tied to geography. It was tied to me, to my choice to become a witness. Once you saw the spaces between life and death, once you answered calls from the dead, you couldn't unsee it, couldn't unhear it. Because someone has to, I said, the same answer I'd given 100 times before. Someone has to witness what happens when the system fails people, when help comes too late or not at all. If we don't acknowledge it, if we don't see it, then those people are forgotten, erased like they never mattered. But they're dead, Scion. You can't save them. You can only watch them die over and over again. No, but I can see them. I can make sure their deaths mean something, that they're not just statistics in an underfunded system. I looked out at the dark desert passing by the window. And maybe, if enough people witness it, if enough people see how broken the system is, things will change. Maybe the next generation won't have to die waiting 90 minutes for an ambulance. Thomas didn't respond. We both knew I was being optimistic. The IHS had been underfunded for decades. Nothing was going to change overnight. Probably not in our lifetimes. Definitely not in mine. I only had 18 months left at that point. After Thomas transferred, I was paired with a rotation of different partners. None of them lasted more than a few months. They'd hear about my reputation, experience a few of the impossible calls, and request reassignment. I didn't blame them. What I was doing required a kind of faith that most people didn't have. Faith that witnessing mattered, even when you couldn't change the outcome. By September 1999, I was working solo more often than not. The administration had essentially given up trying to partner me with anyone. They just let me take the calls no one else wanted, the ones that came from disconnected numbers or impossible locations. The ghost calls. I'd become a specialist in the dead. On September 18th, the day before my death, I was assigned to train my replacement. Alec Begay was 23 years old, fresh out of EMT school in Albuquerque, full of idealism and energy and hope that he could make a difference. He reminded me of myself 5 years ago, before Harold Zoe, before I understood what the temporal wounds were, before I knew I was going to die answering one of these impossible calls. We met at the Chinle station at 7 p.m. for the overnight shift. He was early, eager, his uniform still crisp and new. His ambulance kit looked like it had been organized with a ruler. Everything perfectly in place, ready for any emergency. I almost felt bad for what was about to happen to him. Scion Bitsui? He extended his hand with a bright smile. I'm Alec Begay. I'm really excited to be working with you. I've heard a lot about your work here. I shook his hand, wondering what exactly he'd heard. The official version, dedicated paramedic, specialist in remote areas, or the whispered version, crazy woman who talks to ghosts and thinks dead people call 911. Good to meet you, Alec. Ready for your first night shift? Absolutely. I grew up near Window Rock, so I know the territory pretty well, and I've always wanted to come back and serve my community. Make a real difference, you know? Oh, I knew. I'd had the same speech prepared 5 years ago. We did the equipment check together. I watched him verify oxygen levels, medication stocks, defibrillator function. He was thorough, professional, exactly what the IHS needed, what the Navajo Nation needed, what the dead needed, though he didn't know it yet. Around 9 p.m., we headed out on patrol. The night was clear, the stars bright in the desert sky. A good night for driving, a bad night for dying alone. "So," Alex said as we drove through the darkness, "what should I know about working this district? Any particular challenges?" Where to even start? "The distances are the biggest challenge," I said, going with the safe answer first. "Average call time is 90 minutes, sometimes more. You have to learn to triage over the phone. Figure out who has a chance of surviving that long and who doesn't. It's the hardest part of the job." "I understand. That's why I want to do this. To help reduce those response times, even if it's just by being out here, being available." "That's good. That's important." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. "But there's something else you need to know. Something they don't teach you in EMT school." "What's that?" "You're going to get calls that don't make sense. Calls from phone numbers that have been disconnected for years. Calls from locations that don't exist on any map. Calls from people who—" I trailed off. How do you explain this without sounding insane? "Calls from people who died a long time ago." Alec was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've heard the stories. The other paramedics talk about you. They say you answer calls from ghosts. Do you believe in ghosts? I believe in Chindi, in the spirits of the dead who linger when they die in pain or fear. My grandmother told me stories." He glanced at me. "Are you telling me those stories are real? That we actually get calls from the dead?" "Yes. The Navajo Nation has places where trauma tore holes in time, where people who died waiting for help are still waiting, still calling, trapped in their last moments. And someone has to answer those calls. Someone has to witness what they went through. Someone has to acknowledge that they mattered." I expected skepticism or fear or dismissal. Instead, Alec just nodded slowly. "My grandmother died waiting for an ambulance. 2003, I was 13. Heart attack. She called 911 at 6 in the morning. The ambulance arrived at 10:45. She'd been dead for over an hour." His voice was steady, but I could hear the old pain underneath. "I became a paramedic because of her, because I didn't want anyone else to go through what she went through, what our family went through." 4 years from now. Alec's grandmother was still alive right now, but in 4 years, she'd die waiting. Just like mine had. Just like so many others. "If I told you," I said carefully, "that you could answer her call someday, that you could witness her death, acknowledge her suffering, help release her from the loop of waiting, would you want to?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes." Even if it meant becoming part of the pattern? Even if it meant you'd eventually die the same way, trapped in your own loop, making your own impossible calls. Now he hesitated. "Is that what's going to happen to you? Tomorrow?" So he knew. Someone had told him. Probably Irene at dispatch, who'd been watching the pattern unfold for years. "Yes. Tomorrow, September 19th, I'm going to die in a vehicle accident on Highway 191, mile marker 74. I'll call 911. Help will be 93 minutes away. I'll be dead in 60, and I'll become one of the voices calling from the temporal wounds, waiting for someone to answer. Can't you avoid it? Stay home. Not go to that highway?" I've tried every scenario in my head, thousands of them, but I've been getting calls from myself for 3 years. The death has already happened in multiple timelines. It's a fixed point. Tomorrow, it catches up to me in this timeline. I looked at him. The question is, are you ready to take over? Ready to answer the calls I can't answer anymore? Why do you do this?" His voice was soft now, almost awed. "If you know it's going to kill you, why keep doing it?" "Because someone has to," I said, and realized I was crying. When had I started crying? Someone has to witness what happens when the system fails people, when help comes too late or not at all. Someone has to make sure they're not forgotten, that their deaths mean something. We drove in silence for a while. Then Alex said, "After tomorrow, I'll answer them. The impossible calls. I'll witness for them, for you, for my grandmother when her time comes." "Thank you." The rest of the shift was quiet. No calls, impossible or otherwise. Just two paramedics driving through the desert night, both knowing that tomorrow everything would change. At 7 a.m., when our shift ended, Alex shook my hand again. "It's been an honor, Sion, really. Take care of them," I said. "Take care of all the voices calling from the wounds. They need someone, and you're going to be that someone now." He nodded, and I saw my own determination reflected in his eyes. The pattern had chosen him, just as it had chosen me 5 years ago. I went home and tried to sleep, but couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Highway 191, saw mile marker 74, saw the accident that was waiting for me. Instead, I spent my last day doing what I'd done for the past 4 years. I reviewed case files, I organized my notes, I prepared documentation for Alec about the most common temporal patterns, the locations where wounds were most likely to manifest, the decades that seemed to bleed through most frequently. It was practical work, busy work. It kept my mind occupied. At noon, my pager went off, a call, but this one was different. The number showed as my own cell phone, and when I checked the 911 log, the caller was listed as Sion Bitsui, reporting a vehicle accident on Highway 191, mile marker 74. But that wasn't supposed to happen until 6:47 p.m. Unless time was already fracturing around me, unless the temporal wound of my death was already bleeding backward through the hours. I listened to the recording, my own voice, strained with pain and fear. "This is Sion Bitsui, IHS Paramedic. Vehicle accident, Highway 191, mile marker 74. Single occupant, conscious but injured. Please send help." The timestamp said 12:14 p.m., September 19th, 1999. But I was standing in my apartment, alive and unhurt, listening to myself call in my own death 6.5 hours before it was supposed to happen. The temporal wounds were collapsing. The different timelines were bleeding together. My death was becoming unstuck in time, happening in multiple moments simultaneously. I sat down on my couch and tried to breathe. This was it. This was what happened when you became too entangled with the pattern. Time itself started to fracture around you. My pager went off again. Another call. Same number, same location, different timestamp. 2:37 p.m. Another version of me, calling from Highway 191, then 3:15 p.m., then 4:02 p.m., then 5:28 p.m. I was dying over and over, in different moments, different timelines, all collapsing toward the same point. By 6 p.m., I'd received 17 different calls from myself, all reporting the same accident, all from mile marker 74. I was becoming a loop before I'd even died. At 6:30 p.m., I got in my personal vehicle, not the ambulance. This wasn't an official response. This was completion, closing my own loop. I drove toward Highway 191, and as I did, I started seeing things. Other versions of myself, driving the same route in slightly different vehicles. Younger versions, older versions, versions where I'd never become a paramedic, versions where I'd quit after Harold So, versions where I'd died years ago, all of them converging on mile marker 74. The temporal wound wasn't just about my death. It was about all the choices that led to it, all the moments where I could have turned back but didn't. Every version of me that had chosen to answer the calls, to witness the deaths, to become entangled with the pattern. We were all heading to the same place, the same moment. I pulled over at mile marker 73 and got out. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful. Peaceful. The kind of sunset my grandmother used to love. And then I saw her, an older version of myself, standing on the side of the road, late 40s, maybe early 50s, wearing a paramedic uniform that looked both familiar and strange. The patches were different. The equipment on her belt was more advanced. She was me from 2016, the year I'd called my younger self from all those years ago. We locked eyes, and in that moment, I understood everything. The loop wasn't just about death. It was about witnessing, about the continuous cycle of people dying alone, calling for help, and other people answering those calls until they themselves became part of the pattern. I was going to die today. Multiple versions of me, in multiple timelines, in multiple moments, but I was also going to live. Both things were true simultaneously. I would die in this timeline, in 1999, and become one of the voices calling from the temporal wounds. But I would also continue to exist in other timelines, in other versions, continuing to answer calls, continuing to witness. Time wasn't linear on the Navajo Nation, in the places where trauma had torn holes in reality. It was a web, with multiple strands intersecting, multiple versions of events happening at once. "You understand now," my older self said. It wasn't a question. Yes, the calls I've been answering aren't from the past. They're from all times, past, present, future, all existing simultaneously in the wounds. And you understand what you have to do. I have to go to mile marker 74. I have to die. I have to become part of the pattern. She nodded. But you also have a choice. You can resist. You can try to prevent it. That's what I did in my timeline. I stayed home on September 19th, refused to answer any calls, thought I could break the pattern. What happened? The accident found me anyway. Different location, different circumstances, but the same outcome. Because the pattern doesn't need a specific place or time. It just needs the witness to fulfill their role. She paused. I spent 17 more years answering calls after that first death. Different versions of me, dying and living simultaneously until finally, in 2016, I understood that fighting it was pointless. The pattern would have me either way. So why tell me this? Why not just let me drive to mile marker 74 and let it happen? Because you need to choose. Not to die or not die, that's already fixed, but to accept what it means. To understand that this isn't an ending. It's a transformation. You'll die, yes, but you'll also continue in the calls you make from your death loop, in the witnesses who answer those calls, in the pattern itself. I looked toward mile marker 74. I could see vehicles converging there. Different versions of the same pickup truck, different versions of myself, all the timelines collapsing toward the same moment. What do I tell Alec? How do I prepare him for this? You already have. Just by choosing him, by training him, by showing him that witnessing matters, that's enough. He'll figure out the rest, just like you did. Will he die too? Like me? Like all the others? Probably. Most witnesses do, but not all. Some find a way to close the wounds instead of just witnessing them. Some learn to heal the temporal damage instead of just documenting it. She smiled sadly. Maybe Alec will be one of them. Maybe he'll be the one who figures out how to fix what we've only been able to see. I hope so. So do I. She started to fade, becoming translucent. It's time, Scion. The convergence is almost complete. All the timelines, all the versions, all coming together at mile marker 74. You need to be there when it happens. What happens after I die? You'll see, and you'll understand. And you'll make your calls, and someone will answer, and the pattern will continue, until it doesn't. She disappeared completely, and I was alone on the side of Highway 191. I got back in my vehicle and drove the final mile to marker 74. The sun had set now, and the sky was dark. But the area around mile marker 74 was bright, illuminated by an impossible light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. All the different versions of reality, all the different timelines, creating a phosphorescent glow where they intersected. I saw myself park and get out. Saw other versions of me doing the same. Dozens of us, maybe hundreds, all arriving at the same moment from different timelines. And I saw the truck, coming from the south, moving fast, the driver young, terrified, fighting the wheel. I saw the deer that ran out onto the road, saw the swerve that would cause the accident, saw all the different variations of what happened next. In some timelines, the truck missed me entirely. I survived, lived, continued answering calls until I died of old age or disease or another accident years later. In some timelines, I died instantly. No time to call 911, no time to become part of the pattern. But in most timelines, in this timeline, the truck hit my vehicle with tremendous force. I was thrown, felt the impact, felt the sharp pain in my chest and head, felt the warm wetness of blood. Time fragmented around me. I was dying, but I was also watching myself die. I was the victim and the witness simultaneously. I managed to reach my phone, managed to dial 911, managed to report my location, my injuries, my desperate need for help. This is Scion Bitsui, IHS Paramedic, vehicle accident, Highway 191, mile marker 74. Multiple injuries, significant bleeding. Please send help. The dispatcher's voice, Irene, kind, reliable Irene, tried to stay calm. Help is on the way, Sion. Hang on. ETA is 93 minutes. Can you stay with me? 93 minutes, of course. The system that had failed so many others was going to fail me too. I would die in 60 minutes and help would arrive in 93. I wanted to laugh, or cry, or scream, but I didn't have the breath for any of it. I'll try, I whispered. I lay there on the side of the highway, feeling my life draining away, feeling all the different versions of myself dying in all the different timelines, all of it happening at once. And I thought about all the people I'd answered calls from over the past 4 years. Harold Zoe, who'd waited for help that never came. Robert Benally, trapped in his vanishing Hogan. Annie Goldtooth, dying 7 different deaths, and hundreds of others, all calling out from their moments of greatest fear and pain. Now I understood completely. Not just intellectually, but viscerally. I was living what they had lived, dying what they had died. The isolation, the fear, the desperate hope that help would arrive in time, followed by the slow realization that it wouldn't. The final moments of consciousness, knowing you would die alone, unwitnessed. Your death just another statistic in a broken system, except I wouldn't be unwitnessed. Because I could see Alec Begay pulling up in the ambulance 93 minutes later, could see him rush to my side, check for a pulse he wouldn't find, radio in the death with barely controlled grief in his voice. I could also see myself standing beside him. The version of me that existed in the temporal wound now. The version that would make calls from this moment, this death, reaching backward and forward through time, calling for help that would always arrive too late. And I could see something else, something that surprised me. I could see other witnesses, not just Alec, but paramedics from across decades, from the past and the future. All of them responding to my calls, all of them acknowledging my death, all of them bearing witness to this moment. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. Every call I'd answered, every death I'd witnessed, every loop I'd helped to close, they had all been building toward this, creating a web of witnesses across time, all connected by the same purpose: to see, to acknowledge, to ensure that no death went unmarked. I was part of that web now. Not just a strand, but a node where multiple strands intersected. My death would create calls that would be answered by paramedics who didn't even exist yet, who would be born years from now, in a future where maybe, the system would be better, where 93 minutes wasn't the norm, where people didn't have to die alone. My consciousness started to fade. The pain was distant now, happening to someone else. I could feel myself splitting, fragmenting across timelines, dying here, living there, calling for help in one moment, answering calls in another. The pattern was complete. I closed my eyes and let go. Alec Begay arrived at mile marker 74 at 8:20 p.m., 93 minutes after the initial call. He'd driven as fast as the ambulance would allow, hoping against hope that Sion Bitsui, the woman who'd trained him, who'd shown him the impossible calls, who'd prepared him for this work, would somehow still be alive. She wasn't. He checked for a pulse anyway. Protocol, training, desperate hope. But her skin was already cooling, her eyes fixed and dilated. She'd been gone for at least 30 minutes. He radioed it in, his voice cracking despite his best efforts to stay professional. "This is Unit 12. Patient Sion Bitsui, deceased on scene, requesting police and ME." He sat back on his heels, looking at the woman who'd been his mentor for exactly one shift, who'd told him impossible things about temporal wounds and calls from the dead, who'd known she was going to die today and had come here anyway. That's when he saw it. The light, it was faint, flickering, like heat shimmer on a summer road. But it was there, surrounding Sion's body, extending up into the night sky like a column of phosphorescence. And he could hear something. Voices. Multiple voices, all overlapping, all speaking at once. Some were calling for help. Others were responding. A conversation across time itself, all centered on this spot, this moment, this death. Sion's voice was among them. Not the Sion lying dead at his feet, but other Sions. Younger, older, speaking from different moments, different timelines, all of them calling, all of them witnessing. He understood then. This was the pattern. This was what Sion had been trying to explain. Death wasn't an ending here. It was a transformation, a way of continuing to serve, to witness, to acknowledge suffering even after your own suffering had ended. His pager went off. He checked it. A 911 call. Female, mid-20s, reporting cardiac symptoms. Location, coordinates that matched a Hogan about 40 miles north. Phone number disconnected since 1987. The first impossible call of his career. He looked down at Sion's body one more time. "I'll answer them," he said quietly. "All of them. Just like you did. I promise." The light around her seemed to pulse once, as if in acknowledgement. Then it faded. Alec got back in the ambulance and radioed dispatch. Unit 12, responding to the cardiac call. ETA 90 minutes. As he drove north into the darkness, he thought about what Sion had told him. about his grandmother who would die in 2003 waiting for an ambulance, about how he would someday answer her call from the temporal wound, about how he would witness her death, acknowledge her suffering, help release her from the loop. He had 4 years. 4 years to learn the territory, to understand the pattern, to prepare for the moment when he would answer his grandmother's impossible call. 4 years before, he would have to witness the death that had driven him to become a paramedic in the first place. But he wouldn't be alone. Sion would be there in the pattern, making her own calls, guiding new witnesses. And beyond her, all the others. Decades of paramedics and EMTs and first responders who had died answering calls on the Navajo Nation. All of them still serving, still witnessing, still ensuring that no one's death went unmarked. The web of witnesses stretching across time. He was part of it now. And somewhere in a timeline 17 years ahead, in 2016, an older Sion Bitsui was standing at mile marker 74, watching her younger self die, understanding finally that this was how the pattern worked, how it had always worked. You died. You became a voice calling from the wound. You were answered, you were witnessed, you were released, and then you became the witness for others. The cycle continued, not as punishment, but as purpose, as meaning, as proof that even in death, even in the broken places where trauma tore through time, there was still connection, still acknowledgement, still someone who cared enough to answer. Sion stood at mile marker 74 in 2016 and watched as all the different versions of her death collapsed into a single point. Watched as the temporal wound sealed itself, not completely, but enough. Enough to allow healing, enough to allow rest. And then she faded. All the versions, all the timelines, all the loops, collapsing into a single memory. Sion Bitsui, who had dedicated her life to witnessing death on the Navajo Nation, who had answered 1,248 impossible calls, who had died alone on Highway 191 but had never truly been alone. The pattern had claimed her and freed her. Both things were true. In the ambulance, Alec's radio crackled. Irene's voice. Unit 12, I just wanted to say, Sion would be proud of you. For answering that call, for choosing to witness. Thank you, Irene. I'll do my best. I know you will. And Alec, when you get to that Hogan and find someone who died 30 years ago still calling for help, remember what Sion taught you. It's not about saving them. It's about seeing them, about making sure they know they mattered. I'll remember. He drove on through the night toward the impossible call, toward the beginning of his own journey as a witness. Behind him, at mile marker 74, the roadside was empty and dark. Just another stretch of highway in the vast expanse of the Navajo Nation. But if you knew how to look, if you knew how to listen, you could still hear them. All the voices calling from the temporal wounds, all the witnesses answering, all the deaths that had been acknowledged, seen, remembered. Sion Bitsui was among them now, her voice joining the chorus, reaching across time, making sure that no one who died alone on these roads was ever truly forgotten. This is Sion Bitsui, IHS Paramedic. If you're hearing this, you're probably like me. You answer the calls that don't make sense. You go to the places that don't exist. You witness the deaths that already happened. And you wonder if you're crazy, if you're trapped, if there's any way out. There isn't, not really. Once you become a witness, you're part of the pattern. But that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. Every person you witness, every death you acknowledge, every loop you help close, that matters. It means something. It means they weren't forgotten. It means their suffering was seen. So keep answering, keep witnessing, keep being present for those who die alone. And when your time comes, when you make your own call from your own death, know that someone will answer. Someone always answers. Because that's what we do. We're witnesses. We're the ones who see. We're the ones who remember. And we'll be here, in the temporal wounds, in the moments between life and death, waiting for the next call, waiting to help, waiting to witness. Always waiting, but never alone. Alec Begay served as an IHS paramedic on the Navajo Nation for 23 years. During that time, he answered over 3,000 calls, including 847 impossible calls from temporal wounds. In 2003, he answered his grandmother's call and witnessed her death, helping to release her from the loop. He trained 17 other paramedics in the art of witnessing before his retirement in 2022. Sion Beetsui's name is inscribed on the IHS Memorial Wall in Chinle, Arizona, along with hundreds of other healthcare workers who died serving the Navajo Nation. Her case files and documentation of temporal wounds have been preserved by the Navajo Nation Museum as part of their oral history project. The system that failed Sion and so many others continues to struggle with underfunding and vast distances. Average response times on the Navajo Nation in 2024 remain over 60 minutes. People still die waiting, and the temporal wounds still exist, still call out, still need witnesses. If you work in emergency services on the Navajo Nation or any underserved community, if you answer impossible calls, if you witness impossible deaths, thank you. Your work matters. Your witnessing matters. You matter. Keep answering. Someone needs to.